and welcome back to Boat Fools. So before we can move forward, let's take a quick step back today and go over the process of how we selected and bought the boat that we did. So if you're in the market to buy a boat, you might find this useful. If you currently own a boat, you might find this tedious, but we are going to geek out on some good sailboatdata.com information, so it should be fun. And the real bonus is today I'm going to spare you from having to look at my face. So we're just going to look at some slides and bring you up to speed on how we got the boat we did. And then our next episode, we're going to give you the boat tour. So here we go. So when we were in the process of buying a boat and talking to some boat surveyors, they sort of hounded and pounded it into us that we needed to figure out what our intended use was. And at first we sort of laughed that off and didn't really give it much thought, but then we gave it a lot of thought and realized that it actually did make a lot of sense. So as it sounds, the intended use simply means, what are you going to use the boat for? Are you going to race? Are you going to do day sails? Are you going to do ocean crossing? For us, we had five parameters that sort of defined our intended use. And our intended use was that we were going to use the boat for day sails, do some coastal cruising, and then we had some stretch goals and pipe dreams of maybe doing an ocean race like the Marblehead to Halifax or maybe the Marion Bermuda. So again, those are huge pipe dreams, but we wanted to have a boat that if we ultimately decided to do that, we could. So the parameters that defined our intended use were as follows. I've got a rather big family. I've got 4 children, a wife, and 2 beagles. So it needed to sleep a minimum of 6 and hold 2 dogs. My 2 fellow boat owners have a little bit smaller families, and so we knew that if it fit mine, it would fit theirs. And because we're in Maine, our second parameter was that the boat should be local. We didn't want to, and because we were and are weekend warriors and sail on weekends and maybe some overnights during the week or day sails during the week, we couldn't go very far afield to look at boats. So we needed the boat to be in Maine, and if it ever got to the survey stage or sea trial, we wanted to be able to go do it. We didn't want to have to travel out of state or down south or out west or whatever. We wanted to be in Maine. And then the next parameter, and this was important because we have families and we do a lot of things, we didn't want to overspend on a boat that would tax us in other ways. So we needed to have a budget. Our particular budget was $0 to $40,000. And the boats we looked at fit within those parameters except for one of them, which we'll get to in a minute. And then ultimately, size does matter for us. And, I grew up sailing on a Sailboat 36. One of the guys grew up sailing on a CNC 40. And the third guy previously owned a Bristol 27, which we had a blast sailing, but we just knew that was a little too small for our intended use. And then lastly, we wanted a boat that was seaworthy, sturdy, and something we could single hand. So we didn't want an overly complicated boat or an overly complicated rig. We wanted a simple boat that we could get out and get on the water quickly and get moving as fast as possible. So those were the parameters that defined our intended use. So then moving on, I'm going to introduce you to the 5 boats that sort of fit that bill and that we whittled our list down to. And these boats were all available while we were looking, and were all on the market. And there were a couple models of some of them and only one of others. So in no particular order, let's move on. So our first image from Sailboat Data is the Cape Dory 36, a very sturdy, beautiful boat, outside of our budget range by a little bit, but we thought maybe we could make it work. But ultimately, a beautiful, sturdy boat. A lot of respect for the Cape Dory 36. Next on the list was a Alberg 37, which was, again, a very good-looking boat, a yawl, a full keel, and one was available, which we ended up looking at. Next was the CNC 33, which was the smallest of the group, probably the most nimble, probably the fastest, really ideal for coastal cruising around the buoy, beer can racing, some bigger races, but a boat that could take you anywhere, but probably the fastest. Anyway, and then moving on, we got to a Morgan 382, which we knew nothing about. a good looking boat, solid boat. One was available, and from the pictures online, it looked pretty clean and worthy of a look. Last on the list, but not least, was the Bristol 35.5, a very good looking boat, very solid. The one ding against it was a centerboard. I know it does come in a full keel version or a fin keel version, but one was not available. They were all, the two that were available were centerboard. So now let's go on and look at their calculations on sailboat data, because this is where it sort of gets interesting. Excuse me. The Alberg 37 will be first on the list, again, in no particular order. This boat, loved it. And it had a lot going for it. The sail area displacement of 16 is pretty typical. This just simply means that compared to relative boats, if they're all 16s, they're all going to be similarly fast in light air days and in heavy air days. The comfort ratio on this was off the charts at 39.8. The higher that number, the more comfortable the boat's going to be in a sea state. And because of the full keel, the Alberg was sort of untouchable in that regard. The capsize screening formula, this simply means, if you're not familiar with it, under 2 is what you're looking for if you're going to do any offshore sailing, because if the boat, for whatever reason, ever went turtle, this means it's simply going to right itself without a lot of struggle. So the lower that number, the better. The S number here, we're just going to call that speed factor. They don't really have a name for it, but the definition is simply the lower that number, the more underpowered and slow the boat is going to be. The higher that number, the lower your perf number is going to be if you're racing. So over 2 is considered sort of a racer cruiser, and higher than that, a racer, and so forth. So this Alberg is really not going to be ideal for any around the buoy racing, but certainly is going to move well in the sea because of its comfort ratio and so forth. The hull speed of 6.9 is what it is. And then let's move on to here, just for comparison's sake, here's the CNC 37, which was not on our list, but just to show you some sail data numbers. You can see that the CNC 37 has a sail area displacement of 18 and a speed factor of 2.1. So this boat's going to be significantly faster than the Alberg 37. And then here are some pictures of the Alberg 37 because we did go to see it. So here's a picture of the deck, and just clean lines on this boat. And but the real issue I had was this. This is the binnacle in front of the companionway, which made ease of access in and out of the companionway difficult. But worst yet was that your crew would be sitting behind you in the cockpit. So you're going to have a serious case of FOMO. Everyone's going to be behind you talking, and you're going to be looking down the companionway and out toward the bow. But, a really nice, handsome boat. But then the other kicker was down below, the boat was very narrow, and we'll get to some of these dimensions in a minute, but I could stretch across and reach each side of the coach roof there. And in addition to that, the sink is built into your companionway steps, which are removed here to show the engine. But you can see if you were going up the steps, if you didn't put the sink cover in, you're going to step in the sink. So that seemed like perhaps a hazard. But the boat was in overall great shape. Here's a picture of the V-berth. And the boat had been recently painted on the exterior, so the all grip was all new. And she had a windlass up on the bow, the nice wide decks for walking. Overall, just a really pretty boat that we had to keep on the list. Next up, we have the Bristol 35.5. Again, here's the sail data information. Sail area displacement of 16, similar to the Alberg. Comfort ratio a little bit lower, which just means it's not going to be as steady in the sea state, but all of them have solid, with the exception of the CNC ballast displacement ratio. So anything over 40 is going to be a stiff boat, which is good for some sea states. Capsizing screening formula of under 2, that's great. The speed factor number of 1.5, a little bit faster than the Alberg, relatively speaking. And here's a picture of a Bristol 35. This is not the one we bought, but a good example of a very pretty boat that we wanted on our list. Next is the CNC 33. You can see this one obviously is going to be a little bit quicker. It's got the sail area displacement of 18. Comfort ratio is lower because she's a fin keel. Here's a picture of her. This is not the one we bought. The one we saw was all gripped dark blue with a black spar. Really pretty. And clearly a fast looking boat. Capsize screening formula of 2, so a little bit higher. Speed factor of 2.4. She's going to be pretty darn quick. Hull speed of 6.9. So ultimately a fast boat, but we determined it was probably going to be a little bit too small given the size of the family that I have and the needs we were anticipating. Okay, the Cape Dory 36. Obviously an amazing boat. The most expensive on the list for that very reason. I think it was listed at $54,000. Which is definitely above our range, but it was a stretch that we could have made work if we really thought we wanted the boat. Comfort ratio, again, second only to the Alberg. Capsize screening below 2, speed factor 1.2. So not a particularly quick boat. She wouldn't be great upwind, but certainly great on a broad reach. And it should be noted that Carl Alberg also designed the Cape Dory 36. So that's where she gets her good looking lines. So here's a picture of one, is a good example. Again, just a good looking boat, solid. You could take it around the world without question. And ultimately, she did not stay on our list because of the price. Then we came to the Morgan 382, which we did not know a lot about, but there was one locally available, and we did go look at it. It had the sail area displacement of 16, ballast displacement of 40, so she's a stiff boat. Comfort ratio is a little bit lower, but pretty close to that of the Bristol. Capsize screening formula under 2. The speed factor of 1.9. She's going to be pretty reasonably quick relative to the 4 other boats. And a hull speed of 7.4. Again, we went and looked at this, and she was very clean inside. This is a look of this is the one we bought ultimately, but and this is how we found her, which was very clean on the inside, as you can see down below. Typical 80s classic plastic layout, but a nice clean boat. Kept inside, and for these reasons, it made it a very solid choice for us. Original gel coat. So we were very pleased with that boat when we saw her. So our 3 finalists were the Alberg 37, the Bristol 35.5, and the Morgan 382. And just going down this list quickly, you can look at some interesting numbers here, like the length overall. For the Alberg was 37, Bristol was 35.5, the Morgan just north of 38 feet. And then interestingly, the length along the waterline was a key factor too. The Alberg was 26.5 feet, Bristol was 27.5, and the Morgan at 30.5, which means she's got the longest waterline, which typically means she's going to be the fastest boat. Ballast was all about the same, between 6,500 and 6,800 pounds. The beam, now this is where it gets interesting, for me anyway. The beam on the Alberg was 10.17 feet, so very narrow. The Bristol was just under 11, and the Morgan at 12. So the Morgan was the beamiest, which means she's just going to have the most volume down below and make her comfortable for a big family. Sail area all pretty close, with the Morgan eking out a lead here at 667 square feet. The draft, the Alberg at 5.5 feet with that full keel, the Bristol at 5.75, and I believe that's with the centerboard up, or that might be just the fin keel version. I think with the centerboard down, it's closer to 8 feet. The Morgan with the draft of only 5 feet, so you can really get into some some shallower places with the Morgan. Displacement all pretty close. Morgan's the heaviest at 17,000 pounds, and which just means she's just going to be a solid ride. Hull construction all fiberglass. The Bristol with a cord balsa deck. Ballast type for the Alberg and the Morgan was lead. The Bristol had a centerboard, but the Alberg and Morgan were encapsulated lead keels, which I particularly like, especially for what we're doing. So we don't have to worry about keel bolts, that sort of thing. Here we go, the Alberg with the long keel, and both the Bristol and the Morgan with rudder on skeg. And what's interesting about all three is that the the prop is protected by the skeg and rudder. And for our purposes, that was significant in terms of where we're sailing on the coast of Maine with all lobster buoys. It gives us a little extra protection. All masthead sloops except for the Alberg, which is actually a yawl. First built in 1967 for the Alberg, and the Bristol and Morgan both in the late 70s, which means they're just all the newer developments in terms of construction styles were implemented in those boats. Last built in the 80s for the Morgan and Alberg, and late 90s for the Bristol. And now here's something interesting. The number of boats built. Alberg at 248, Bristol at 183, the Morgan at 300. Now, the Morgan also came in a 383 and a 384 for a combined total of 500 boats built of that design. Minor differences between the models, most significantly the taller rig on the 383 and the 384, the Traveler moving to the coach top roof, and a larger rudder on the 383 and the 384. Otherwise, similar hulls. And what this means is you're just going to get good online support. There are great forums for the Morgan, for example, the morgan38.org site, but I'm not familiar with the other two, but I'm sure there are similar support groups out there. So essentially, the larger the number of boats made, more likelihood you're going to find online support with people who have similar boats to hash ideas around with. I'm not going to get into all the measurements here, but on the next page of sailboat data, we are going to get into some more calculations, which are, hang on, let me just get there. Pause this and get to this. So I just wanted to talk about the, where did it go? Oh, here we go. Sorry. We're going to talk about the rest of the specifications here. They all have diesels, all reputable diesels, the Volvo, the Yanmar, the Perkins, respectively. The Perkins on the Morgan. Horsepower, they are all reasonably similar, though it's not noted here, but the Morgan has the Perkins 418, which is basically 50 horsepower. Bristol at 22 and the Alberg at 23. Alberg had 60 gallons of water, Bristol 100. And I know that our Morgan has, I think it's 80 or 100. It's got 2 tanks, so it's definitely more than 55. Fuel, basically all similar, though. The Morgan's got 40 gallons, and I guess one of the rules of thumb is that if you've got 40, you want a minimum of 40 gallons if you're going to do any ocean passages. Designer names, all aces here. Carl Alberg, Ted Hood, and Ted Brewer, Jack Corey on the Morgan. These guys are all true geniuses when it came to boat design. Unfortunately, Ted Brewer left us last year. Anyway, comfort ratio, moving on. Morgan's got the lowest, but within close tolerance to the Bristol. And obviously the Alberg with the best at that 39.8, untouchable with that full keel. The displacement to length ratio, this is, the Alberg is a heavy displacement. The Morgan is on the cusp of heavy displacement, the lightest in the group that way. But then we get the ballast displacement ratio. Anything over 40 is considered stiff. So the Morgan and the Bristol win in that category. And then the sail area displacement ratio, again, we've seen these before earlier on, but the Morgan's going to be the fastest there at 16.2. Capsize ratio, all under 2, which is great. And the speed factor, again, comparing similar boats, the Morgan's going to be the fastest of the group. So ultimately, at the end of the day, we went with the Morgan, and didn't know a lot about her, but ultimately, because of the condition she was in and because of the owners, we did not use a broker. We went directly through the owners. They were fantastic. They were selling the boat to buy a bigger boat to sail around the world, and they have been hands-on with us since day one. And because, again, because of the condition of the boat when we found her, she was the winner. And we got her for a very reasonable price, we think, and have fallen in love with the boat. And we have a fair amount of work to do, but which we're going to share with you on the road here. But we fell in love with this boat, and for the next episode, we're going to take you on a tour of the boat and show you what we got and what we need to do. And we look forward to sharing that with you. So stay tuned, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much.